Should go back there. I can always. I'm on. Hey. You saw my lips moving, but Matthew has what is sometimes called a fulfillment formula. This was written to fulfill, and Jay shared one of those with us today. Matthew is the Jewish gospel. We've mentioned that before, and it has a very Jewish flavor. He's talking to Jews about Jewish things. When Mark talks about the same things, since he's writing at first to what was probably a Roman audience, probably dictated to him by Simon Peter, he will explain, and sometimes John will explain what's going on. But Matthew doesn't explain because he's writing first blush to a Jewish audience. And so we need to get into how prophecy worked from the perspective of the Old Testament and the perspective of Jews, because that's how God did a lot of that. One of the things that we tend to think, I think, in Western thinking, is that if there's a prophecy, it's a straight line. The prophet said this, Jesus is there you go. Well, if we look closely at Matthew, we find that while that can certainly be the truth, it is not always the truth. So, though Matthew has 60 different ways of referring to the Old Testament, he has some of these in order to fulfill. And these are the ones we want to look at because it really opens our mind up to how the Jews functioned in their relationship with God and some of the things that were common to their culture and the way they thought that are not common to the way we think. But it works, and it's not that hard to figure out. Here's a thing that I have in the handout that, what is that word? These things were written in order to fulfill. What is that? Plepotha. And it's been defined this way, which it helps us to understand what's going on with that word. Because when we see fulfill, we might not think about it this way. And we may think about, some people have really been put in a quandary when they look at Matthew and they say, that's not what that Old Testament verse was talking about. Why is he saying this was written to fulfill that? So here's some things that can be used to define fulfill. To cram, to fill it full. Okay? Fulfill. To fill up. To fill to fullness. To fully preach. To execute. To perfect. So those are some of the things we want to think about as we look at how Matthew does this. Let's go to Isaiah 7:14 in surrounding territory to get an idea of how this works and how I was there at Freed Hardeman. Brethren almost come to blows over this. So please. I fell on the hike today. If I'd have been 45, nobody would have thought anything about it. But I ain't. So they're thinking, is he going to get up? Are we going to have to haul him out? Jerry gets us on this hike, well, we'll have a little hike. Mile and a half. 83 miles. Uphill both ways. Thank you. No, it was very enjoyable. We're going to try to get more folks to join us next year, talk it up a little bit better. But Isaiah 7:14. What's going on here? There's a context. And this will serve in many ways. We'll do somewhat abbreviated as we look at the various times when Matthew does this. But we'll let this be the one that we spend more time with because once we see it here, we'll get a good feel for what's going on when God is revealing himself. So here is the setting. The northern kingdom of Israel and Aram, Syria, the king of Syria, are coming down to wage war on the king of Judah. And so Asa is our man, that he's wondering what's going to happen. We've got these two kings that have come down south, and everybody is worried about it. So in verse 3, then the Lord said to Isaiah, go out and meet Ahaz, you and your son Shear Jashub. And these names are given to represent something, and Emmanuel is going to be part of this in just a minute. And say to him, take care and be calm, because he's nervous. Have no fear, and do not be faint-hearted. So this is what's going on, a very present danger, very present threat. Because of these two stubs of smoldering firebrands, on account of the fierce anger of Rezin and Aram, the son of Remaliah, because Aram with Ephraim, the son of Remaliah, has planned evil against you. So Syria and the northern kingdom of Israel have decided that they're going to take you out. Just calm down. It's going to be all right. So they plan to do this, and the Lord is sending Isaiah, his prophet, so that he can speak to him and let him know it's all going to be okay. Verse 7, thus says the Lord God, it shall not stand, nor shall it come to pass. They're coming down here to conquer you, but they're not going to do it. Don't be afraid of them. He calls them smoldering firebrands. This is like if you got a wood fire, and every once in a while something might pop out. What happens to it? Set your house on fire? No. What happens to it? It dies, right? Because it's. He says that's what these people are like. They're all hot and after you, but don't worry about it. They're going to lose their zeal for this. He says, let me tell you how this is going to go down. He says, for the head of Aram is Damascus, Syria. And the head of Damascus is Rezin. Within another, notice what he says, this Rezin guy who's bringing his army down. Within another 65 years, Ephraim shall be scattered, so they shall no longer be a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is the son of Remaliah. If you will not believe, you surely shall last. So he says, 65 years from now, this is not going to be a problem. 65 years from then, I want you to know that this is not going to be a problem anymore. So, there's more. Verse 10. Then the Lord spoke again to Ahaz, saying, ask for a sign yourself. He's out here with Isaiah, and Isaiah's there, and Isaiah says, the Lord said, I want you to ask for a sign, so the Lord will God make it deep as Sheol or high as heaven. And the Lord will give you a sign to show you that what he's just said is actually going to happen, because he's scared. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, nor will I test the Lord. So then he said, listen now, O house of David. Now, house of David has been used before, and what does it refer to? The dynasty of David. So who's in the dynasty of David right now? Ahaz. So he's talking to him. Is it too slight a thing that you would try the patience of men, that you will now try the patience of God as well? So this thing, he said, I'm not, don't want to do that. I trouble the Lord. He's faking it. He said, wanting people to think he's this super trusting person in the Lord, and he doesn't need a sign. He's going to be okay. And the Lord says, stop it. It's enough that you try men's patience. Now you're trying my patience. So he says, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. You haven't asked me for one, I'm going to give you one. What's the sign about? To confirm that the enemies from the north would not carry out their mission. In fact, even within 65 years, Ephraim's not going to be around. Why? Because they're going to be taken into Assyrian captivity, so I won't have to worry about them anymore. But he says, therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin will be with child and bear a son, and will call his name Emmanuel. This is quoted by Matthew in Matthew 1:23. This was written to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. Okay? He will eat curds and honey. At the time he knows enough to refuse evil and choose good. So a child, when the child grows up, at some point kicks in, his diet changes, he starts eating more substantial food, and he becomes more aware of the do's and don'ts of life, and can start thinking about that. Before the boy will know enough to refuse evil and choose good. The boy, we're talking about what's going on now. Those people are coming down, and there's going to be a child born. And before that child that's born knows how to deal with right and wrong, and before his diet changes, the land whose two kings you dread will be forsaken. Now, if this is a straight line prophecy to Jesus, it's like saying, well, 700 years from now, these people aren't going to be a problem to you anymore. Which is not exactly going to comfort Ahaz, because he's going to be dead. So what's going on here? This is the way Matthew deals with prophecy. This is, with 7:14, we kind of, what's going on here? But he's doing this all the way through Matthew. This was written to fulfill. And we'll look at some of that. Now, here's the thing. There's only one virgin birth. And he's talking about that. But he's not talking about that. He is, but he isn't. He's talking about both of them. A type, antitype. A fill it fuller, bring it out more. Now, there is a virgin who is going to conceive, he says. It's, in fact, in Hebrews, the virgin. So there's somebody in the court of the king that Ahaz would recognize, if you will, and will be with child. Now, he isn't saying here something that of necessity has to refer to a virgin birth. It will when Matthew uses it, because that's going to fill it as full as it can be. But every woman that's ever given birth to a child was once a virgin. And one could have said of her, the virgin will conceive. Again, keeping in mind that this fulfill has to do with the fullness of something. And the fullness of this is not going to be here. Look over at Isaiah chapter 9 for just a moment. Isaiah chapter 9. Let's make it chapter 8. These people are coming down. They're a threat. Let's see what's going on. Verse 8 of chapter 8. Then it will sweep on to Judah. These enemies are coming down to Judah. Sweep on to Judah. Will overflow and pass through, and it will reach even to the neck. So it's like a flood, and the water's coming up. It looks like it's going to be curtains. But no. Something's going to happen to keep the water from rising on. And the spread of its wing will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. Jesus wasn't born till way down the road. How is there going to be an Emmanuel there that's there when all this is taking place? Because there was a child that was named Emmanuel, represented like Shear-Jashub. Melchizedek gets thrown in there in a little bit. And the symbolic nature of it, God with us. And the first part of that is he will be with you when this happens, and within 65 years, and yes, even within this child getting to a certain age, these people are not going to be bothering you anymore, not going to be a promise. So when Matthew brings that up, and we'll look at how Matthew does with other scriptures in the Old Testament, he understands that Jewish spatial, not Western analytical, is part of what's going on here. And that there is more to cram into that, to fill it full, than was exhausted by Ahaz and his situation. So, Matthew 1:22-23, Isaiah 7:14 is the first one that we have there. Now let's just look. I've got the others. Matthew 2:6 predicts Bethlehem. What does Micah 5:2 predict? Bethlehem. This is a rather straight line prophecy then. It's going to be Bethlehem. They ask the wise men and Herod, well, where's he going to be born? He consults with his people, and they say, well, Bethlehem. Why? Because Micah 5:2 said it. Matthew 2:15. Look at Hosea 11:1. Hosea, if you prefer. Out of Egypt will I call my son. Hosea is referring to when God called Israel out of Egypt. But Jesus will serve as what we call a corporate personality. He represents his nation when he comes. What does he do? First, he's going to be tempted in the where? Where's he going to go? Wilderness. How many days is he going to be tempted? 40 days. How many? Israel, 40 years. And when he's tempted, he quotes from Deuteronomy 3 times an address that Moses gave to the people after they'd come out of the wilderness wandering and they'd all died there. New generation has come up. And in effect, what we have here, Jesus is the champion of Israel against Satan. And he throws temptations at him, and he does in the wilderness what Israel should have done. Where Israel falls to Satan, Jesus stands up to him, and he won't have it. So there's a case where something Hosea is talking about, nobody would have ever thought it was talking about Jesus, but when you think about how's that going to get filled up? What happens to Jesus? He goes down to Egypt, and then he calls him back to begin his ministry. That's filling it full. That's packing it. That's more than Israel could ever do. Here's an interesting one, Matthew 23:17-18. Have a look at that. Matthew 23:17-18. This is the Babylonian destruction that Jeremiah talks about in Jeremiah 31:15. But Matthew is talking about it as it relates to Jesus. What happens when Herod finds out that the wise men have fled and they have not come back and they have not told him where the child is? He comes up with a scheme, does he not? What's he going to do? He's going to kill every child from 2 years old and under because he perceives when the star was seen, and he's taking no chances. The slaughter of the innocents, this is sometimes called. So Matthew 2:17, which is a quote from Jeremiah on down. Then what has been spoken through Jeremiah the prophet has been fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning. Rachel, figuratively speaking, is weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted because there were no more. This is the devastation of Babylonian captivity Jeremiah is talking about. But even more devastating, it did not involve more children, but it involved an attempt to kill the Son of God. This is the worst attempt that has ever been made against God's people, because if they had killed the Messiah, it's all over. But they did not. Now, Matthew 2:23, he shall be called a Nazarene. Where's that in the Old Testament? If you were in my class at East Tennessee, I'd wait for 30 minutes or so, but we don't have that much time. You can't find it like you would be looking for it. But what if I told you that one of the names that Jesus is referred to prophetically is the branch? And what if I further told you that the Hebrew word for branch is Natsar? And Nazareth is the place of the branch, and Jesus, as a Nazarene, is the man of the branch. Play on words. It's all through the Old Testament. We can't really see them that much because it's in Hebrew and we've got English. One place that you can see it, one about the only places is Adam and Eve, Ish and Isha, they sound alike. They don't come from the same root or anything. They sound alike. And it was a play on words between Ish and Isha, woman and man. And it's literally scattered all through the Old Testament, especially in the prophets, where sound-alikes are part of the development of the prophecies. It's a way that their mind worked. And so to them, those that are receiving Matthew's gospel from a Jewish perspective, this sounds normal. To us, it's like, really? But to them, not so much. I have mentioned to you before, many of you know Greg Wanderman. He was adopted by a Jewish couple and raised, went through synagogue stuff, and he'd say all the prayers and all this and all that. And so one day, a friend of mine calls who's over at West End where he and his wife attend, and he says, I've been studying with this guy. His wife's a member over here at West End, but he is a Jew. And he just, I can't get through to him with Jesus. And he says, you're the Old Testament guy over there at the school. Can I bring him over? And so he does. He looks for all the world like a big red-headed Irishman because ethnicity he is. His Jewish parents are a little bit short people. And they're physicians, of course. So he comes over, he's got his Greg Wanderman scowl on. I hope you're listening, Greg, because you know that's yours. And so he says, you people in the church don't know how to use prophecy. And he used Isaiah 7:14. He said, that's not a straight line prophecy, and you say it is. And I said, I don't say it is. And he said, oh. So we went to Matthew. And I said, let's look at some things. How Jews saw dual fulfillment, double sense, adding to, packing full something that was said back there and giving it the biggest meaning they could possibly have in Jesus. And he said, yeah, that's how it works. He became a preacher in the church. And it wasn't me, it was the Bible that did that. Because he wanted, as a Jew, he had a certain way of looking at how they did prophecy. Again, it seems a little strange to us. But here's Matthew doing it all over the place. And he's not done. In Matthew 4:14 through 16, he quotes from Isaiah 9, 1 through 12, about those who lived in darkness up north. Zebulun and Naphtali are the first people to get whacked when somebody comes down to invade. So they've been living in darkness. They're the first ones to suffer devastation. Anytime anybody from the north, which is usually where the enemies are coming from, come down. He says, but this land that's in darkness will one day see a great light. Well, they were in darkness because they were in darkness. That's why he was doing it. But one day a light would shine. Jesus' ministry in Galilee. So that's another way that he deals with that. Matthew 8:17. Jesus will take the infirmities and the diseases of the people. Now, does that mean that literally he'll take all the sickness into himself and all the infirmities and he'll just kind of, and he'll have all that in himself? No, it's just a figurative thing. He's talking about sin. Now, outwardly, he did things like that. He cured people, right? And that's a way of establishing himself as the Messiah. Is you can't do things like this unless you're the Messiah. And what does John ask? Is this the one? And what does Jesus send word? Tell him what I'm doing. I'm doing what Isaiah said the Messiah would do. So that enters into part of this too. He'll be a nurturing servant, Isaiah 42, 1 through 3. In Isaiah 6, 9, and 10, the people are going to have dull ears. And Isaiah is talking about the people of his own time that are dull of hearing. But when Jesus is doing parables, how many people are picking up on it? They'd be like, and so, in fact, they would say, why are you talking like this? And he said, well, you know, the prophets said this is how it's going to go. And the folks aren't going to get it because they don't want to get it. It's amazing what you don't hear when you don't want to hear it, isn't it? And what you do hear, whether it's there or not, when you do. So that became part of it. He was going to speak in parables. That's another way that the Jews did a lot of things. And so Matthew said that would happen. Psalm 78 too. Jesus coming into Jerusalem on a donkey. It may be that something had happened back then that involved a donkey, but the Messiah never came into town in a donkey. Their prince, their king, the one they're looking for to set up a kingdom and get rid of everybody else. And so there he comes. Interesting, in Zechariah 11, 12, and 13, you've got a price that is paid for a person that is then and there in Zechariah's life. And it's basically saying, what a marvelous price you put on this man, being sarcastic in that the price was way lower than it was worth. And then they're going to take the money and they're going to buy a potter's field, which is going on, if you will, in Zechariah's time some way or another. But one day, somebody's going to come, and what are they going to pay Judas to betray Jesus? 30 pieces of silver. That fills the betrayal idea as full as it can be, because you can't be any fuller in betraying than betraying Jesus, the Son of God. And the potter's field. What do they do? Well, we can't take this money that Judas has thrown back at us because it's dirty money and we wouldn't do anything like that. We'll buy a potter's field. Okay? So if you look at Zechariah, you'd never figured out that that was messianic. But if you look at type antitype, you see that it fits. In fact, the more we understand how the Jews processed, and the more we see what is a commonly recognized feature, a dual sense prophecy. For instance, when David decides he wants to build a temple, remember that? And Nathan, great idea, let's do that. Then God appears to Nathan and says, you know what, it's not a great idea. We're not going to have David, he's a man of blood. His son Solomon is going to. And so he talks about Solomon there, and he talks about his kingdom will never end, and he talks about that Solomon's going to have a position that only the Messiah could have. But it's not Solomon. Solomon is a type of Christ. He represents something about him that will be made full when Jesus comes. And you find that in Acts. You'll find some prophecies referred to that Jesus has taken what happened then and he's filled it as full as he possibly can. What did he say when he starts the Sermon on the Mount after he's given the Beatitudes? He realizes some people are going to think, seems like you're going against the Old Testament. In fact, some people will say, when he says, you have heard, but I say, that he's putting the Old Testament to the side. He starts the sermon in practical fashion by saying, don't think that I've come to destroy the law of the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Not even one little piece of a letter can be changed until all is fulfilled. So all is fulfilled until everything that was in the old covenant has been packed as full as it possibly can be, until there's nothing else for it to be able to do to accomplish its purpose. And when did that happen? Jesus is on the cross. And when he realized all things had been accomplished, he said, it is finished. In the Old Testament, its binding nature as a covenant would be replaced by a new covenant. So, there's a lot of interesting things about prophecy and how they work. Sometimes they are straight lines, sometimes type antitype, sometimes they play on words. But the idea is that however we get it to Jesus, you can't get any better than that. You can't go any farther with it than that. That's why in Ephesians, we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, that this Christian age is known as the age of the ages. And why we have an administration or stewardship suitable to the fullness of the times. Fullness of the times. When everything got as full as it could be in preparation for the Messiah came. And he filled it up and took it on. So, it's interesting getting into how prophecy is given, how it's fulfilled, how you can have a double sense. There's the first meaning, the initial meaning, and then there's the fuller meaning that only could be true of Jesus and the kingdom. So, that's kind of amazing. Straight line prophecy is amazing enough, but you can, as God, have Israel's history, like in the wilderness or other times with Ahaz, that their very history is speaking to the coming Messiah. That's hard to do. In fact, you can't do it unless you're God. So, our God is an awesome God. And when he calls us in Jesus, the one who crammed it full of everything it could possibly mean in himself, he invites us to be his disciple and to follow him. And that's a tremendous invitation, that the God of all things, who has been in history and has worked his hand to bring Jesus and to offer him to us, is giving us the chance to be his disciples. If you're not, why not become one? If you're not, why do you resist? There is no better offer that you will ever receive, and there is nothing that will fill the empty place that everybody has if it's not filled by Jesus. To those of us who are Christians, what we do isn't just because we can say this verse says we're supposed to do it. Ha-ha. Well, yeah, verses say things that we do, but there's so much more to it than that. These verses give us the mind of God. They show us how he's been in history. They show us how things explode out of history, how Jesus, as the corporate representative of Israel. Remember Goliath? What do the Philistines say? We'll send our guy out. You send your guy out, and they'll represent us. And whoever wins, wins. Guess who won? David. That God who can take those things and explode them, who can take a disaster in the wilderness and have Jesus, the corporate representative, the champion of Israel, stand up to Satan and say, you're not getting away with it this time. And take that all the way to the cross. Hopefully that will inspire us to serve even better. If you need to respond to the invitation of Jesus, won't you, as we stand to sing?